Hi, welcome. Today you're going to hear the first part of a three-part conversation that I'm going to be posting sequentially over the next 3 weeks with Dr. Lucia Lorenzi. I'm really excited about it. I think you're going to have a lot of fun listening. I want to highlight that if you're one of my friends or colleagues or followers kind of along for the project, this is a conversation where we really dig into the nitty-gritty of academia. If you're not someone who's in that world, I also want to highlight that Lucia is beyond talented at talking about these things in a way that will make it accessible across different types of institutional work that we sometimes find ourselves in. So I'd really encourage you to tune in, listen to it, and then I'll have an exit screen cap of sorts where I explain how you can tune into the rest of the conversation. All right, thank you so much and enjoy. Hi, welcome to the Poetry Vlog. Today we have a guest interlocutor, Lucia. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Lucia. I'm a postdoctoral fellow in English and Cultural Studies at McMaster University in Canada. Formally, that's what I do. Informally, I yell on Twitter a lot. And that's where the majority of my intellectual and creative work takes place these days.
Yep.
Yeah, so in some ways it's interesting because I feel like when I introduce myself, I'm like, this is my institutional affiliation.
Yep.
It's just so awkward and so bound up in these problems and institutional systemic garbage. But yeah, I think out loud.
Yeah.
That's pretty much what I do now.
I'm interested in diving into this Twitter conversation. Technically, for everyone watching and listening, this is where we met, so to speak. And I think you tweeted about being kind of just done with the peer review edited journal article process. And it's not because you can't, it's because there are various reasons you don't want to. And that was a moment where I've been trying to find ways to use Twitter as community or coalition building in addition to critique. And I was like, oh, I so get that. Because I'm in a similar boat. I can get the paper out, but I feel this deep, embodied, no, I don't want to. I'm kicking and screaming the whole way. Would you be willing to talk a little more about Twitter ranting and how it informs your work, or even just about that particular tweet? Totally up to you.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Twitter's been something that I don't know, it sort of started as a place to observe and follow other people. I appreciate the way that I can curate a feed that allows me to learn from people, especially marginalized and oppressed folks, without being the person who asks them questions all the time. I can just absorb the information, which is fantastic. And I found more and more that it's so much easier for me and more timely often to put together a Twitter essay, which is thought out and often has a theoretical framework or a through line. But then when I think about having to take that and put it into a peer-reviewed essay form, I don't want to, and I don't see the point because it's already out there. The work is it's already doing the work.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been one of the things that's interesting for me is that I'm trained as a literary scholar, but I kind of veer more towards cultural studies. And even though I do close readings, I love a good close reading, form is not always something that I pay attention to.
Yeah.
Or the interplay between the form that I'm studying and the form that I'm writing in. And I feel like Twitter has really made me think a lot more about form.
Yeah, interesting. I totally agree with that, actually. I'm similar. I'm in an English department, and I'm very deep in cultural studies, probably. And I had a weird moment when I was working on my research statement when I had committee members be like, "Well, you're going to have to explain why you're considering Lemonade and Kendrick Lamar's music videos, literary texts." And I was like, this is a waste of my time. If you don't know, or you expect me to perform knowing that audio-visual texts are texts, and then if you're asking that about a music video, and you're not asking that about Edgar Allan Poe's Ravens, then what am I doing here? What is the meaning I'm adding to the world with my PhD work? It feels like hula hoops I'm jumping through, and truly hula hoops they're moving.
Yep, absolutely.
As opposed to actual thoughtful interaction of knowledge production that's also listening really well. I don't know if you've had similar experiences actually coming out of literary background and going more cultural studies, but it's a quirk I've noticed.
I mean, I started my PhD and I was really lucky to work with, a supervisor initially who does creative work. And I got to write songs instead of essays for 2 of my grad courses, which was fantastic. And then sort of inevitably the way that the program is set up, that you have to do your comps, and that has a certain form, and then you end up doing your prospectus in a certain form. And at a certain point, I just sort of gave up the idea of doing creative work. But it's really interesting because on the one hand, there's what you mentioned, is that the struggle to get certain things recognized as text. And then there's that moment where they're like, okay, this is valuable, you should be studying hip hop and visual art, but like, you have to write in this totally academic way. Like, it's fine to study that form, but heaven forbid that the work that we do is in dialogue with it or mirrors it. So I've definitely struggled with that a lot, and sort of trying to give myself permission to do it anyway. Yeah. That's something I struggle with so much.
Yeah, well, it's scary because there's gatekeepers.
Exactly.
Yep. Yeah. I had a moment when I started this project, actually, and I had my worst year ever with rejections. And like, I deal with rejection a lot. That's just the game when you're a poet and scholar, right?
Yep.
And it was a bad year of rejection. And I suddenly realized that like I wasn't starting projects like this, or I wasn't working on a new manuscript, because I was treating applying for funding like applying for permission to do it.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, you're not funding me anyway, so I may as well just do it. But there's that like that kind of, it's still not like validated by the institution, so it's not taken seriously in the same way.
Exactly.
Right? And it was my dissertation too. Like, everything I read is either like a Dionne Smith poem, or it's a music video, or it's like news media. But and it's all about like escaping legibility to a certain extent, like the fugitivity concept, or like the violence of being told that you have to like perform being knowable. But then the dissertation form is a forced performance of being knowable. So I'm like in like my dissertation committee meetings, like, this feels like wildly hypocritical. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like it feels violent.
It is. Yeah, for sure.
I don't know if you can speak a little bit to how it feels for you, but yeah.
For sure. A friend of mine, Carrie Jenkins, who's a professor in philosophy at the University of British Columbia, and she's been doing a lot more like sort of public scholarship. But her and a colleague, Carla Nappi, who I think is now at the University of Pittsburgh in history, they had been both teaching Plato's Symposium in their classes.
Okay.
And they were like, this is a problematic patriarchal text. Like, what do we do with it?
Yeah.
So they've written, and I've gotten to see the manuscript, and it's incredible. It's this poetic reimagining of the entire symposium.
Yeah.
And it's incredible.
Yeah.
And what Carrie was telling me, it's just like, we didn't ask for permission to do it. We just did it.
Yeah.
Which is, of course, some of the things I often hear that like, wait till you're tenured so then you can do the radical work. I'm like, well, no, because my spirit will be crushed by then.
Yeah.
And I want to, I don't know, I've had the feeling for a while, like I haven't been applying to tenure track jobs because I want to do my work on my own terms. And if the academy wants that, then this is what they're getting. Like, I
think that like English departments in particular, this is probably like a very rash opinion to put out on the internet, but I feel like when they refuse to see how like enacting performance and performance studies and doing creative work is like valid scholarly contributions, they're contributing to why they're dying as departments. Because I think it's something that like everyone else also sees. You shouldn't be embarrassed to say I'm an academic in public, right? And if you are, it might be a sign that like the way academia is doing things is not quite right, and I feel like I have so many students that are like incredibly creative. They come up with these amazing, like, we call it multimodal writing, where like you can create a Twitter feed or an Instagram feed or et cetera as like their essay, and they do an amazing job, but then they're like, now what? Yeah. You know what I mean? And then they're out there getting like however many followers and people are listening to them, but then you have like the scholarly essay they might produce in 10 years if they get the PhD that's read by like maybe 5 other academics, And it's like, how do we validate these sorts of knowledge? How are we deciding it? I mean, it is like extremely classed, extremely racialized, and extremely gendered, you know? It's why I've been finding Twitter particularly interesting because I'm new to it. So I've been like struggling to get a foothold in like how it works. Can you talk a little bit about your experience with Twitter? Like what you love about it, what you hate about it, how you see it as like, we could say that a Twitter post is a poem, right? I would say that.
Yeah.
So if you could talk about like the process of thinking through like form and content more when you're using Twitter.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what's so interesting about Twitter is that like, it's not linear like a newspaper article or like a journal table of contents, that there's this constant like cacophony of voices that are intermingling on your feed, and people that you follow will retweet something else and then you follow them. And sometimes you'll see sort of thoughts out of order depending on, you know, how people are intervening in the conversation. And for me, that's felt really valuable and more sort of, again, these problems of like authenticity is a problematic term, but this is how we do our work, like in this messy conversation and dialogue. And sometimes it's, you know, and critique is a part of it, and not critique in this disciplinary way, but critique in how do we push each other's thinking further.
Right. And I feel like what's interesting to me about Twitter is I'm a very like long form writer, whatever genre I'm in, right? So I'm like, I'm going to write a poem and it comes out like 5 pages, 9 times out of 10. Like, I'm going to do an Instagram post and this time I'm going to make the caption 1 sentence and it ends up being this long. Like, it's really hard for me to cut. And Twitter's forced me to start learning to cut, you know? And so it's also like part of what's fascinating to me about that is how you have to get really, really good at being like, here's what I'm criticizing, here's what we could do instead. And making those two things coexist is like really hard on Twitter.
It is.
Like really hard. And it's hard to know like how to enter the conversations too, I think, because of that. How long have you been on Twitter for, actually?
I think, I want to say on and off since 2011. I know that I had an account for a bit and then kind of deleted it, but I think pretty thoroughly since 2013, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
Somewhere around there.
Has your experience on it changed at all, or is it pretty much the same?
I think it's been interesting, these moments where I've gotten a lot of followers at once and now sort of having like a decent sized group of people following me.
Yeah.
And part of that is, you know, great because I get to put my thoughts out there and people respond or whatever. But what's interesting for me is that for so long I was afraid of like peer review, like, you know, the scathing critique from reviewer 2 or whatever. Yeah. And I realize now that that's not what sort of makes me nervous or anxious. But what makes me nervous or anxious, and I think it's in a productive way, is knowing that if I go on Twitter and if I tag somebody who's involved in the conversation and they respond and they're like, actually, no, or yes, but like that's more the accountability in that is kind of terrifying. Right. But it's also really exciting because it means that I can engage in conversations with people right away, and it makes people accessible. Like I've sort of transitioned, so I'm trained as a Canadianist broadly, but I've always done trauma theory as well. Yeah. And now it's sort of triangulated, and now I'm doing Black studies in Canadian literature. And it's kind of a new field for me in some ways, and so I'm reading all these things and watching lectures and then being like, oh, this person's on Twitter. Why don't I just tag them in the thread? Yeah. And then having these conversations, and it's really exciting because often people are like, oh, well, you know, people are accessible at conferences, but then there are these big name scholars, so you're not going to talk to them at conferences. And like, are they going to show up to your panel if you're a grad student? And I think that Twitter doesn't always break down those hierarchies, certainly, but certainly intervenes in them productively at different moments. Yeah.
And you're also teaching, right?
Not at the moment.
Okay. Because I was going to ask if you teach like social media or multimedia, because I know that you're also a musician, right? Mm-hmm. Would you be willing to talk a little bit about that, or we can skip it because we didn't talk about this before? Sure. If you're like, no, Chelsea.
That's totally okay. Yeah, it's always been, I don't know, something that I've done kind of on the side, I guess. But yeah, in 2010 when I was taking starting my PhD and writing music that wasn't just like, that was narrative and that was intervening and in response to certain texts. And I found that that's been a really productive way for me to try and articulate something, or at least be in conversation with, even if I don't have my thoughts fully formed or worked out.
Yeah.
And I feel like, I'm recently taken up painting, and that's functioned in the same way, I think.
Okay. What do you think it fulfills, that like text-based writing, when it's supposed to be understood, to put it more bluntly, right? Because sometimes poetry, you're allowed to, I consider poetry in the realm of more music and painting, because its goal isn't to communicate a thing that you can hold on to necessarily, right? At least good poetry, in my opinion. But yeah, so what do you think that fulfills for you that like academic writing doesn't, or that like tweeting doesn't, right? Because I have a very similar experience. I find that even though it's hard to foster creative energy and keep my poetry going and keep putting my manuscript out there, it's also like, if I'm not doing that, I start to feel like just like I'm withering up. So what's your experience with working across those like modes and genres?
I think for me, part of it is I wrote my dissertation on silence. And so it's I've always had this interest in, what language can or cannot represent, but also this idea that, a lack of language in a particular way isn't like a sign of oppression or silencing, that it can be this deliberate, like it can be an act of refusal to engage in certain modes of knowledge production and circulation. But I think for me, more than anything, I'm sort of learning now that, academic writing can also be beautiful. Like it can be aesthetically wonderful. But I think for me, I only came to that realization through music, which is, a song is a song, and it can be like aesthetically and sonically pleasing and have nothing to do with the actual content of the lyrics or whatever. Like it can be appreciated as a particular object, but then it also has this other function.
Interesting. No, that's interesting. I know you mentioned before we started that you have someone you've been musing on. Would this be an appropriate time to ask about that?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Because I know that's part of it for me, is I have to have work that I know I won't write a paper on, that I'm like super digging, if that makes sense. But yeah. So
again, I was trained as a Canadianist, but didn't actually end up reading a lot of work by Black writers.
Okay.
Just sort of the way that, I don't know, whether the comps process was set up and different things. But so it's been this real treat as a sort of extracurricular project to my postdoc, is just reading as much writing by Black Canadian authors as I can. And Dionne Brand is just majestic. Like I've studied her novels and taught them before in classes, but to really just sit with it is a completely different experience. And she's got a couple of like two books at the same time, which is like that kind of sort of prolific production is always amazing. But one collection is called The Blue Clerk.
Okay.
It's very much about sort of the act of writing and archiving and what that does. So part of it was published in Granta magazine a few months ago.
Okay, yeah.
So I'll just read a little bit from the first verso.
That'd be great. Thank you.
So verso 1, on the back of a leaf. What is said and what is unsaid? What is written and what is withheld? What is withheld is on the left-hand page. These are left-hand pages. The moment they are written, they will not exist. That is, they will not exist as themselves, as they were first conceived. What is withheld is on the back of the leaf. I have withheld more than I have written. I have restrained more than I have given. I have left unsaid more than I have said. I have withheld much more than I have withheld. Even these 9 left-handed pages have already created their own left-hand pages, as will be seen. I will have added for clarification or withdrawn some detail. I will have parsed the structure of the sentence and the meaning of the sentence and reformulate it to resolve some understanding that was tentative in the first place, but that merely for the sake of agreeing to a rule of syntax I have to present as certain. Moreover, I will have cleaned out all of my doubt, or all of my prevarication, or all of my timidity. The left-hand page is a recursive page. Each verso becomes a recto. Each left-handed page generates one right-handed page and an infinite number of left-handed pages. What is withheld multiplies. The left-handed pages accumulate with more speed and intensity than the right-handed pages. They are chronic. That is to say, they are always present, occurring, intrinsic and incurable, unfailing and uneasy like freight. The freight of withholding, gathered over years, becomes heavier and heavier, indefinite and unbounded weight. That's the first verso.
Oh, that's so good.
Yeah.
Is it, I haven't read it myself. Are there line breaks or is it prose style?
It's prose style.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Very cool. So what was your experience when you first read it and why did you pull it out today? I have some theories, but...
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's interesting. I've been thinking a lot about this sort of tendency where I speak a lot and I rant a lot, and then this incredible reluctance to speak and this desire to not engage, and the tensions between those kinds of things, and not really understanding what that meant for me, like knowing I had this impulse to sometimes just not speak deliberately.
Yeah.
And through my dissertation work, like I love the political and the aesthetic uses of silence. And I like these ideas of these sort of like known unknowns.
Yeah.
And what is lost, the trace of what is lost, these sort of indications of loss. And I think for me reading this now, and I can't wait to read, the full book and get my hands on it, but the sense that I mean, in my experiences in the academy, like I've withheld so much,
Can you explain more?
Yeah.
Because I think I know what you mean, but yeah.
Yeah. And part of it is feeling like I can't speak about certain things because of power dynamics, or, should I put together a conservative funding proposal because it will net me the money and then afterwards I can do, whatever I want. But this realization that I feel like in an English department, in the training, there's this sort of idea that if we just write more and we just read more, like we'll get to it.
Right.
Like this process of like recovery, this recovery will be possible in archival work. And I think part of, work for me in trauma theory, but also working in Black studies, is reconciling with the absences in the archive and what we do with that.
Hi, so that was the first part of 3 different sections of my conversation with Lucia Lorenzi. We had a ton of fun talking a lot about poetry, academia, silences, disability studies, race studies, colonization, all of it. And I'm really excited to post it in 3 parts. One of the goals of this project was to keep the time manageable. And while I'm going to move from a 20-minute platform to a 30-minute max platform with the interviews, trying to keep my own like solo posts under 20 minutes, I do think it'd be wise for this one to break it up into 3 so you have time to digest it, think about it, and sort of have a teaser that leads into the next one. So today we talked about so much and ended on silence and erasure. So next time you tune in, I'm going to have that part of our conversation posted within the next week, actually. So you can hear more about what Lucia thinks around ideas of silence, what it has to do with poetic form, dance form, scholarship, and how we just live every day with the histories that we have. I'm very excited about it. Lucia is brilliant and incredibly articulate, so it's a really huge treat and privilege that she was willing to be so actively part of this project. So look for that episode next week, and then after that there'll be one last one, and that will be it with Lucia, though we might check in with her again in the future. For now, thanks for tuning in. Remember, if you have any questions or comments, I'm going to summarize it this time. All of the links are down in the description. There's a podcast version of this just as much as there's a YouTube version of this, and the links are also in those descriptions equally. And you can always go to chelseagrimmer.com because there are all of the hyperlinks. Like you go to the Instagram, the Twitter, my email, kind of just everywhere. So it's basically a hub. So feel free to check those out and get back to me in any way you want. I've started having some really great conversations from folks who are watching this, and I might start including those if they permit it in the future. So I'm also excited about that. All right, have a lovely day, and I look forward to the next posted conversation. Bye.